An unprecedented shift in North American geopolitical dynamics is currently unfolding as the Biden-era cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline project transitions into a high-stakes diplomatic standoff. President Donald Trump, having frequently asserted American economic dominance and the ability to move global markets with a single post, now finds his administration in a state of strategic anticipation. The White House is currently awaiting a critical commercial decision originating from Calgary, Alberta, where Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former central banker, has engineered a complex negotiating timeline. While initial reports framed this development as a standard energy or trade story, current events suggest a more profound struggle over regional control and economic leverage. The tension centers on a 60-day window that has effectively sidelined the executive power of the Oval Office. After publicly declaring a desire for the pipeline's completion, the Trump administration has revealed its primary objective, whereas the Canadian leadership has maintained strategic silence. This sequence has placed the United States in a position of documented waiting, a notable departure from traditional bilateral negotiations where the larger economy typically dictates terms. The situation is not merely about energy infrastructure, but about the strategic orchestration of power, with the next 2 months determining which nation holds the definitive advantage in the North American trade relationship. The origins of this specific friction trace back to October 2025, during the first official meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Carney. Contrary to analyst expectations of Canadian concessions, Carney presented the Keystone XL project, now referred to in technical stages as the Prairie Connector, as a proposition rather than a gesture of goodwill. Following this meeting, the president publicly confirmed his support for the project, inadvertently setting a clock that favors the Canadian negotiating position. As the United States begins processing permits for a project whose commercial viability has not yet been finalized, the focus shifts to the 30th of March 2026, when a critical industry process known as an open season officially closed, starting a countdown that leads directly into major trade deadlines. The technical and commercial core of this standoff is centered on the Prairie Connector, a pipeline project managed by South Bow, the entity formed following TC Energy's spin-off of its pipeline division. This infrastructure is designed to transport 450,000 barrels per day of Canadian heavy crude from Hardisty, Alberta, to the United States border, eventually linking to the American refining hubs in Cushing, Oklahoma, and the Gulf Coast. On March 5, 2026, South Bow initiated an open season, a binding commercial process where energy companies commit to long-term shipping contracts. This process concluded on March 30th, triggering a 60-day assessment period that will expire around May 29th. Crucially, this deadline falls just 33 days before the July 1st review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or CUSMA, creating a compressed timeline for trade negotiations. Reporting indicates that the project is not a total rebuild. Approximately 150 kilometers of the pipeline are already installed in Alberta, having been permitted and constructed before the project was halted in January 2021. This existing infrastructure allows for a rapid reactivation if commercial conditions are met. Despite the lack of a final investment decision from the Canadian side, a White House official confirmed to Reuters on March 24th that the administration's energy team is already working diligently with partners in Canada to process permits. This admission confirms that Washington is moving forward with regulatory approvals for a project that remains commercially unconfirmed by the Canadian developers, highlighting a significant gap in tactical positioning. The economic necessity driving the American interest is rooted in refinery architecture. U.S.
Gulf Coast refineries in Texas and Louisiana were engineered specifically to process the heavy crude oil found in the Alberta oil sands, rather than the light sweet crude typical of Middle Eastern production. This technical dependency has historically created a mutual reliance between the two nations.
though current market conditions have heightened the urgency for the United States. Following military operations involving the US and Israel against Iranian infrastructure, the Strait of Hormuz has become a high-risk zone for commercial shipping. With Brent crude trading near $15 per barrel and roughly 20% of global oil trade passing through that choke point, the strategic value of stable, land-based Canadian energy has shifted from a trade preference to a national security priority for Washington. While the Trump administration has utilized tariffs on steel and aluminum as a primary tool of economic pressure, the results have deviated from intended outcomes. The 25% tariff implementation served as a catalyst for the political rise of Mark Carney, whose mandate is centered on economic sovereignty and resisting external pressure. Furthermore, these trade barriers have accelerated Canada's Pacific pivot. The Trans Mountain expansion, which connects Alberta to the British Columbia coast, is already operational, allowing Canadian oil to be exported to South Korea, Japan, and other Asian markets. According to shipping records and purchase agreements, every barrel of oil committed to Asian refiners is a barrel removed from the available supply for U.S. Gulf Coast facilities, fundamentally altering the leverage dynamics of the North American energy market. The financial implications of this 33-day window between the South Bow announcement and the CUSMA deadline extend directly to the American consumer and the broader continental economy. With the Prairie Connector potentially moving $47 million worth of oil daily at current market prices, the failure to secure this supply could result in a significant downstream squeeze. If Gulf Coast refineries lose access to their primary feedstock due to a breakdown in trade negotiations or a permanent Canadian pivot toward Asian markets, the resulting cost increases are projected to impact gasoline, diesel, and petrochemical prices across the American South and Midwest. Analysts are closely monitoring the Canadian dollar as a real-time indicator of the probability of a deal, noting that the volatility in foreign exchange markets reflects the high stakes of the July 1st deadline. Three primary scenarios currently define the outlook for this geopolitical standoff. In the first scenario, a commercial commitment by South Bow provides the Trump administration with a visible infrastructure victory while granting Canada relief from steel, aluminum, and automotive tariffs. This outcome is viewed as a mutual victory that stabilizes North American energy stocks. Conversely, the second scenario involves a failure of commercial commitments, leading to a collapse of the CUSMA framework. In this event, Canada would likely accelerate its strategic reorientation toward the Pacific, forcing American refineries into a costly and prolonged transition to alternative sources. The third, and most statistically probable outcome, involves a period of strategic ambiguity, where South Bow and the Canadian government provide incomplete assurances to maintain leverage, effectively extending the negotiation cycle into 2027. The broader consequence of this development is a fundamental reassessment of how power is exercised in 21st century diplomacy. Despite the massive disparity in military and economic scale, Canada has utilized its control over critical supply chains and energy infrastructure to maneuver the United States into a reactive position. The 60-day clock currently governing the Oval Office's schedule highlights that patience and the sequencing of infrastructure projects can serve as decisive tools in international relations. As the May 29th deadline approaches, the global community is watching to see if the strategic control of essential energy flows will outweigh traditional methods of diplomatic pressure, fundamentally redefining the nature of power in the North American corridor. For more updates on this developing trade story and the upcoming CUSMA negotiations, subscribe to our national news alerts.